What's going on, boys? It is day number 12 of reading through the book of Job. I just want to say this video is probably going to be pretty short. I'm recording this really late at night, and I only have two verses that I want to cover for tonight that I'm going to go over pretty briefly. We're going to be looking at Job's response to his friend Zophar, and we're going to be kind of covering, how he feels in response to how Zophar explains, the power of God, and how Job just kind of, reiterates that into a claim of, this is, God's power. He has the ability to control, so much about our lives, between, what we see, what we hear about, especially, the things that, make the world the way it is, maybe, about the land and the water and the birds and the animals and the fish in the sea and the constellations in the sky and the sun that gives us light, everything that is, a natural, provider for us, everything that's about that. So in particular, I want to look at verses 13 through 14 as my first kind of part. Job says, "To God belong wisdom and power, counsel and understanding are his. What he tears down cannot be rebuilt. Those he imprisons cannot be released." So really only those who are free and wise can be a part of God's kingdom. Now, as most of us know, there is no such thing as being free or being freed by our own selves or by our own kind of, selves, maybe by like a certain person. We can be wise, but we're still trapped in the slavery of sin. That's what we're, constantly fighting in life, is this battle of sin that has been inflicted into our DNA for, multi times, generations. And, we really must understand that, it's not about us controlling the things of the world, the things about how life should go. It's God in control of everything. And there's nothing that opposes it. There's nothing that comes in contact that have any sort of effect on God's plan. God doesn't have to think about it. He thinks and it's done. He does and it's complete. And in our world, it's just so hard to get a grasp of, because we see it as one thing and then it gets changed or altered. And then we automatically change our minds to say, well, that's not good. That's not really what I wanted to have happen, And for Job, as we know, he's lost everything: his land, his animals, his family. He's lost everything, and he's looking at God like, God, why? What's going on? Like I know that you're the God that can, give and take things away, but for me, Job, why everything? He's like, you would think for most people it would be like, one or two things, maybe a certain, addiction that someone has or what. But for Job, it's everything. So it's like, God, he's looking at God, like, well, what's going on here? And it's also important to know that, some things that God, jumps into to interfere with are meant to happen, to prevent you from getting into a part of your life that you would have to dig yourself out of. It would take you your whole life, basically. And this is going to lead me into my second set of verses that I want to cover. It's verses 22 through 23. Job says, "He reveals the deep things of darkness and brings utter darkness into light. He makes nations great and destroys them. He enlarges nations and disperses them." So there's nothing that man can hide in the darkness that God can't just inflict into the light, or snap into light right away. So there's nothing that, even if it's the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to you, most embarrassing thing you've said or thought or done, there's nothing that can't just prevent God from just bringing it up into the light. But what's so great about God is that he's not a God that, is just this dictator over our lives that, demands certain things about us. No, he wants us to come to him as if, we were, coming to our parents. As we know that, as kids, we depend on our parents. We depend on them for, our food and our drinks and getting us to school and getting us to, sports practices if we play them, or any sort of activities that we have going on. And, when we have questions, we ask. When we feel bad about ourselves, we have ask. Or when we get in trouble, we ask, or whatever. That's the kind of same mentality that God wants with us. He wants us to be like, hey, I want you to come ask me questions. I want you to be comfortable around me. I understand that my ways of teaching can, may seem confusing, but they're not meant to be easy. Oh, excuse me. They're not meant to be this, sunshine in the meadow type of easy. It's meant to be this, battle of intensity that's going to take a long time to get a hold of. But once you get a hold of it and you're strong with your faith, you will remain very strong. You will remain possible. You have the ability to defeat all of your enemies. God raises up the righteous and destroys the foolish. So the righteous ones, so the ones who have been freed from the slavery of sin and understand that, they, desire knowledge, God will allow into the kingdom. But those who are foolish and far from God and oppose everything in his ways, those are the ones that God will cast out and say, no, you're no good. A buddy of mine shared this with me, and I want to finish off with this. There's 3 answers that God gives to questions that we have, and I think this fits very well to, the situation with Job, about him asking about why God has done this. God's answers are yes, no, and not yet. So you may be thinking, well, why is it those 3? Why is it never more answers? Well, because a lot of times when we ask questions about things, even though someone answers with like a very rhetorical answer or a rhetorical response, it usually fits into one of those categories: the yes, no, and not yet. It's like a yes, this is going to happen, or no, that's not going to happen, or not yet. It's like, we'll have to see about that. Not yet. There's not much going on here right this second. You don't have to just wait and see how things go. And the not yet can even lead to yes or no. It doesn't just lead to yes, it leads to both. But I really feel for Job as he continues to, fight through these serious emotions and try and understand, how to get a grasp of, developing this new kind of style as he has to rebuild himself back up. But that is the end of today's word. I hope you guys had a great week. I hope to see you guys very soon. Peace out, boys.